everybody, it's Nikki from the future here. I just want to apologise that this video is kind of late. We'd hoped to publish it to Patreon supporters on Tuesday and then to general audience on Wednesday, but it's now Thursday when this video goes out. The reason is that there was a software update that screwed up our audio plugins, which meant we couldn't actually open any of our editing programs. It's taken nearly 17 hours for one of our editing programs to actually open and validate all of the files. So yeah, that's why it's late. We're also heading off to the UK next week, so we're kind of busy with a lot of different things. Sorry. Today's video is, I'm afraid, very US-centric. And while we have viewers from all around the world on this channel, including Africa, Asia, and South America, along with the more commonly guessed suspects like Europe, Australasia, and North America, hi! I think it's worth watching if you're viewing this anywhere but the USA. Because, like it or loathe it, the US automotive market is large enough to influence the automotive market in most of the rest of the world. Outside of China, at least. Also, I'm not a tax expert. I am just a lowly automotive YouTuber who focuses on EVs, has a Bachelor of Music degree, and happens to know how to play more than one note on the oboe at once. I'm also a part-time fluffy animal and have a weird, rare heart condition that means you can literally scare me to death if you jump out behind me and go, boo. I'm not joking. Look up long QT syndrome. All of that is to say that this video is not, and should not be used as tax advice. If you want to buy a new EV and you want to know what the tax credits are going to be, you need to check with a tax professional, not a part-time dog with a dicky heart and a reasonably good set of lungs. I'm also not a policy wonk, but I do at least now have a set of almost Rachel Maddow glasses. Anyway, disclaimers are over, so let's get on with it. Last year, shortly before the US entered into the midterm election cycle, President Biden signed the Inflation Reduction Act into law, the third of three interconnected bills passed into law during the first 2 years of President Biden's first term. The act focused on making the US more economically competitive on the world stage by fostering innovation and industrial productivity, as well as continuing the groundwork from the bipartisan infrastructure law and the CHIPS and Science Act to make the US less reliant on fossil fuels by expanding renewable energy generation and offering tax breaks and incentives for both businesses and individuals making the switch to clean cars and green energy. It also directed the federal government to take steps to lower America's carbon emissions, funded the IRS to be better equipped to deal with ensuring taxpayer compliance, and lay down key foundations designed to lower the cost of prescription drugs, along with a whole host of other things that I'm not going to go into here. In total, just about $1.5 trillion of spending was approved, and whatever your political affiliation or beliefs, it was one of the largest and far-reaching bills we've seen in modern US history. Of course, if you are watching this video, the chances are you want to hear about one specific part of that bill, and that is the federal tax credits for plug-in vehicles. Shortly after the bill became law, the US Internal Revenue Service issued interim guidance that was effectively a bit of a halfway house when it came to plug-in vehicle tax credits. This temporary guidance removed the manufacturer cap on electric vehicle eligibility, meaning cars from automakers like Tesla and GM, who had previously reached the 250,000 vehicle limit as outlined in previous tax codes, were once again eligible for up to $7,500 in tax credits. It also made some changes to income eligibility requirements and set a maximum sticker price limit to ensure hyper-luxurious high-end EVs were no longer eligible. And critics of the government couldn't use that as proof that EVs were just playthings for the wealthy. Those interim rules, the IRS said at the time, were to allow it to properly plan and implement the intent of the Inflation Reduction Act, which wanted to factor in additional eligibility criteria for new EV purchases, such as where the vehicle was made and where the materials the vehicle contained were from. Given the complexity of those proposals, the IRS needed additional time to make sure everything lined up, and we were all told to expect the IRS's official proposed rules sometime by the end of March. It's now early April, which means you've got about 10 days left to do your taxes by my calculations if you haven't already. Seriously, why did you leave it until the last minute? And the IRS has just published its proposed guidance for EV tax incentives on its website, which it says will be applied to all new EVs put into service on or after April 18th this year. So today, I'm going to highlight some of the interesting things the proposed guidance contained. And to reiterate, this is proposed guidance. While it's likely the guidance will become the official tax code without any changes, things could be tweaked after the consultation period, so don't treat this video as gospel. For some time now, we've expected that the IRS's rules on EV tax credit eligibility would require that you were under the maximum modified adjusted gross income threshold for eligibility. That's $300,000 for joint filers, $225,000 for heads of home, and $150,000 for everyone else. Additionally, your vehicle would need to have a sticker price of under $55,000 for cars or $80,000 for SUVs and pickups. Next, we'd also expected that the car would need to undergo final assembly in the US, something I'll come to later on in this video, and also that the battery pack contained a specific percentage of US-sourced components. And finally, that the raw materials within that battery pack came from the US or were refined in the US. But wait, because there's a super important thing in this proposed guidance that I wasn't previously aware of, something that could reduce some of the international friction that happened after the IRA was signed into law. And yes, as a child from the UK in the 1980s, my brain really struggles when I use the letters IRA together, and it wants to immediately think of the terrorist organisation from that period of history by the same name. Initially, it appeared that in order to be eligible for full tax credits, the raw materials inside applicable electric vehicle battery packs would need to be mined or refined in the US. But the proposed tax regulations appear subtly different, allowing cars containing battery packs made of raw materials either extracted or processed in countries that the US has a free trade agreement with to be treated as if the raw materials were mined and refined in the US. Just last week, the US and Japan signed a free trade agreement that included some of the raw materials commonly found in EV battery packs, and the proposed guidance lists 20 other countries that already fall under this rule thanks to existing free trade agreements. This not only means that Panasonic, which is of course one of Tesla's battery partners, gets to enjoy no import taxes on materials it brings into the US from Japan, but it also gives Japanese automakers a bit of an incentive to utilize their existing Japanese raw material supply chains for battery packs for US production facilities. The same is true for mining and refining operations in Australia, for example, where some of the world's largest lithium mining and refining facilities are currently based, and where Tesla has a lot of companies working with it. And because international free trade agreements can change, the proposed rules add in flexibility to add or remove countries as agreements are established or torn up. I will admit, maybe I missed this subtle thing the first time I looked at the proposed rules way back last year. I have been to sleep a lot since then, but regardless of if it's new now or if it was always there and I didn't see it, I do think it's worth noting in this video. In order to give the US auto industry and the mining industry time to react to these new rules, just how much US source materials are in your battery pack will change with each passing year. This year, your new EV's battery pack will need to contain 40% raw materials mined or refined in the US or a country that the US has a free trade agreement with, but that figure will slowly increase to 80% by 2027. In a similar way, your battery pack will need to have 50% of US-sourced components this year, ramping up to 100% by 2029. If you're confused about the differences between raw materials and components, that is totally okay. In this context, it's the difference between the raw materials used to create individual cells within the battery packs versus all of the other non-cell components in a battery pack. Things like microprocessors, copper bus bars, and other electronic doodads. Finishing off, let's look at that final assembly rule. I'm not going to quote US tax law verbatim here, but paraphrasing, final assembly is basically categorized as the place where a vehicle gets everything installed that's required for it to be delivered to the dealer and then for it to be legally driven home on the road by its first owner. And here is where things are slightly fuzzy. Unless I'm mistaken, and again, remember that I am a part-time fuzzy animal who plays the oboe and is not a tax expert, I believe a car company which produces the chassis and other parts of a vehicle outside of the US, but then installs the battery pack into the vehicle in the US would ultimately make its vehicles eligible for the tax credit. Throughout history, there are cases of automakers shipping completely knocked down kits for cars and other vehicles, basically unassembled but complete, from one country to another, just so they can assemble it locally to satisfy whichever law they're trying to take advantage of. And just days after the proposed rules were released, right at the tail end of last week, we already have noted automakers responding to the rules to let customers know exactly what incentives their vehicles will attract. For example, the Ford Mustang Mach-E and Ford E-Transit will only be eligible for $3,750 of US federal tax credits, since they only meet one rather than both of the domestic sourced or mined and refined criteria. The F-150 Lightning, meanwhile, gets the full $7,500 US tax credit, assuming that the sticker price isn't above $80,000. Which, if Ford keeps putting the prices up, is not a foregone conclusion. As time goes on, we'll see automakers shift their production plans to the US in order to gain the full credit, and we can also expect more trade agreements to take place as automakers lean in on politicians and civil servants to grease the wheels that ultimately makes the modern world go round. And on that note, we are done with today's video. If you have comments, drop us a polite note in the Discord chat room on Mastodon, or if you are a Patreon supporter, in the comments there. If you want more, subscribe, hit the bell, and follow the links to regularly support us for the YouTube membership or a Patreon subscription. You'll also find links to our Ko-fi, Bitcoin, and Swag store, as well as that aforementioned Mastodon server. Scrolling on my right is the list of amazing charged up supporters, and shoutouts go out to our self-driving tier supporters: Paul Nelson, Mike Weeder, Danny Hyde, Linda Irish, Lance Schall, Mark Egerton, Cyprian Laplace, John Trammell, Alan Tupper, Chris Maxwell, Brian Newton, Bennett Elder, Andrew Martin, Sean Tucker, Pedro Mora Pinheiro, Kyle Hodgson, Tony Moss, Brophy Wolf, Kyle Fox, Hey Esker, Tasla in the Gong, Dan Blair, Peter Dillinger, Gordon C., Stefan Fremgen, Stephen Williams, Regine Fellows, Chris Sental, and Jim Burness. And finally, out of this world thanks to our top tier supporters: John L. Henderson, Clay Witt, CPU Freak 101, John Lyons, Kevin Burrowbridge, Andrew Glenn, Joe Hughes, Dave Kitchen, Joe Bresney, Nigel S., Matthew Drobnek, Eric Knack, Paul Conway, Stephen O'Donoghue, JP Fagerback, Reggie Watts, Marcel Ward, Robert Flannery, Aaron Hahn, Rory Litwin, Ellery Hensley, Will Graylin, and of course, Ian. Don't forget that we make videos every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday on this channel, plus over on Sundays on Take Two, our chicken and garden updates, and of course, our Sunday musing. And with that, I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. I will be back soon, as will the rest of the team. But as always, keep evolving! Welcome to the classic Mac Easter egg at the end of this TE video, and today As you can see behind me, I have a G4 tower complete with a period monitor that is donated to the channel by the lovely Anonymous Freak. Thank you very much. This means that not only can I run this computer with an appropriate monitor for the period, but it also means that I can bring out one of my G4 cubes. I'm also very excited about that. This Mac behind me is a G4 gigabit Ethernet version. It is about the same age as the G4 Cube. This one has been upgraded with an SSD, believe it or not. I have a little IDE to SSD adapter, and I've got 3 different flavors of Mac OS X on there, as well as the original OS 9.2.1, the original classic environment as it's called by a lot of enthusiasts. I rescued this from a shop in my local town. It was for sale in a used shop, and the computer when I got it home had lots of naughty pictures on it. So I had to bleach my eyes out, and then, not literally, don't bleach your eyes out, kids, that's bad, I'm joking. I had to scrub the hard drive. I actually deleted everything on the hard drive, erased it like 3 or 4 times over, and the hard drive was dying, so I drilled some holes in it so that it couldn't be resurrected by anybody. But the drive that's in there right now, it is a brand new SSD, and it's free from all of the horrendous stuff that the previous owner had kept on it. I don't know if it's because I'm asexual or if it's just because I'm not really into that kind of thing, but yeah, it wasn't pleasant.